I'm Lena Romano. I'm 30 years old, and I used to lie about my job at every single family dinner. I didn't lie to strangers or to friends or even to clients, just my family, the people who were supposed to know me best. I'd dodge their questions, make up titles, or say things vague enough to be forgettable. Because telling the truth, I work at a funeral home, usually brought silence. Or worse, that look. You know the one. Half pity, half shame, as if I'd walked into the room dragging a coffin behind me. To understand how I got there, you have to understand the Romanos. We're not famous, but we act like we are. My father owns several construction businesses across Long Island, mostly inherited from his father. My older brother Marco is a neurosurgeon with a boat and a lake house. My little sister Julia just made partner at a corporate law firm in Manhattan. My mom? She's the kind of woman who wears pearl earrings to the grocery store. She once canceled lunch with me because people like us don't eat in diners. And then there's me, the middle child with a degree in anthropology and a job helping grieving families plan burials. I don't own a boat, a condo, or a diamond necklace, just a pair of scuffed leather shoes, one decent black coat, and a quiet apartment above a flower shop in Bayshore. I started working at Mulberry & Sons Funeral Home when I was 24. I'd just finished college, couldn't find a job in my field, and needed something fast. The ad said funeral assistant. I showed up in a blazer 3 sizes too big and was hired on the spot. My first week, I helped carry a casket out of a church while an elderly woman sobbed so hard she collapsed into my arms. That was the moment I knew I couldn't leave this work. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't high-paying. But it meant something. Unfortunately, meaning doesn't get you very far at a Romano gathering. At my cousin's engagement party, my dad introduced me as between things right now. At Thanksgiving, when Marco's hospital research was mentioned, or Julia's firm's latest court win was celebrated with toasts, I was usually in the kitchen helping my aunt refill the wine glasses. Once, my own mother looked me in the eye and said, "You're not a disappointment, Lena. You're just not what we expected." I smiled, nodded, and went home to cry in the bathtub with the shower running so my upstairs neighbor wouldn't hear. I started avoiding holidays, said I had work, volunteered for weekend shifts, wrote fake on-call notes to excuse myself early. But no matter how far I pulled away, there was always one night I couldn't skip. My mother's birthday. It's her night. Always at an upscale Italian place in Brooklyn Heights. Always with at least 40 people. Always catered and choreographed like a charity gala. She treats it like the Met Gala for suburban success. If you miss it, you get a voicemail that starts with, "I gave birth to you," and ends with, "Don't bother coming to Christmas." This year, I sat at a table between Marco's wife, who asked me how I cope with being around death all the time, and a distant cousin who offered to connect me with a real job at his bank. And then, out of nowhere, Mom stood up to give a toast. "To my children," she said, raising her glass. "To Marco, who saves lives with his hands. To Julia, who fights for justice in the courtroom. And to Lena." She paused, looking around the room like she was trying to remember my name. "Who helps people say goodbye." There were chuckles, not the kind you laugh with, the kind you flinch at. I smiled anyway. Because I've had practice. Later that night, while everyone danced and drank, my father pulled me aside outside the restaurant. It was cold. He didn't offer me his coat. "Listen, sweetheart," he said in that half-whisper, half-sigh way of his. "Your mother and I have been talking. We're going to stop the monthly support. Not as a punishment," he added, like that made it better. "It's just, we think it's time you reevaluate things." He squeezed my shoulder like that counted as affection and went back inside. I stood there alone, in a rented dress, thinking about the $42 in my checking account. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Mrs. Garland, the widow I'd helped plan her husband's memorial last week. "Thank you for how you treated Jack. You made the worst week of my life bearable. I'm bringing cookies to the office Monday. I hope you're there." And just like that, I remembered why I do this. They thought cutting me off would break me. They didn't know I'd already started building something of my own. The Monday after my mom's birthday dinner, I skipped breakfast and went straight to the funeral home. I didn't want to see anyone, didn't want to talk. I just needed silence. The kind of heavy, respectful silence only a place like this could offer. Mrs. Garland showed up around 10, just like she said. A box of lemon bars in one hand, 2 coffees in the other. She hugged me like a grandmother who already knew you were hurting but didn't need you to say it out loud. "You good, sweetheart?" she asked gently. I nodded. Lying had become second nature. Later that afternoon, after a small service for a retired school teacher, I sat in the office with the blinds half drawn and the overhead light buzzing softly. The building smelled like lilies and wood polish. It always did. I opened my laptop, stared at the same Excel sheet I'd been tinkering with for weeks, and did the math again. The numbers weren't massive, but they were honest. After paying rent, wages for the 2 part-time assistants, maintenance on the hearse, and 1,000 other little things, there was still money left. Enough to save. Enough to maybe, buy out the place when Mr. McIntyre finally retired. He was 68 and tired, though too proud to say it. He ran this funeral home like his grandfather had in the 1950s, by instinct and ledger books. That evening, I waited until he'd locked up the chapel and was pouring himself his usual single malt before I brought it up. "I want to make you an offer," I said, trying not to shake. He didn't laugh, didn't scoff, just stared at me over the rim of his glass. "I'm listening." I laid it all out. What I'd saved, what I could borrow, what I believed we could do with better tech and a little renovation. He didn't say a word. Just reached into his drawer, pulled out a yellowed folder, and slid it across the desk. Inside was a worn, handwritten note. His will. His succession plan. "Your name's already in there," he said quietly. "I always figured if you stuck around 5 more years, I'd make it official. But I guess you're ready sooner." I almost cried. Not because of the opportunity, but because someone had seen me. Someone believed I was worth trusting. Still, the banks didn't see it that way. 3 weeks later, I walked into a credit union in Queens with a full business plan, 3 years of tax documents, and a personal pitch I'd practiced in the mirror 20 times. The man across the desk barely skimmed it. "You're too young. In this industry?" He shook his head like he was doing me a favor. "Funeral homes don't grow. They fade." I left with my jaw clenched and pride bruised, but not broken. The next few rejections didn't even sting. They blurred together. No collateral, no proven track record, not scalable. I started tuning them out halfway through the meetings. Then came the call I never expected. It was from Mrs. Garland. "You still looking for funding, dear?" I laughed, bitter. "Yeah. You happen to have a few $100,000 lying around?" Silence. Then she said, "Actually, I do." Turns out her late husband had left her a generous life insurance payout, and their children were already financially secure. She told me in the softest, steadiest voice, "You were the only person who treated Jack like a human being, not a customer, not a transaction, just someone who mattered. That meant more to me than anything." She offered me a loan, not a gift. $40,000 at 0% interest to be paid back when it feels right. I didn't say yes that night. I sat with it, wrestled with it, felt ashamed, grateful, terrified, all at once. But a week later, I signed the papers. We moved fast. Mr. McIntyre was finally ready to let go. We changed the name from Mulberry & Sons to Willow & Romano. The willow tree for grace and grief. Romano for me. I didn't tell my family. Not because I wanted to surprise them. Because at that point, I couldn't stomach another half smile from Julia. Or another, "That's sweet, honey," from Mom. It wasn't anger. It was something colder. Like finally accepting they weren't ever going to get it. And yet, even in that quiet success, something in me still hoped. That maybe one day they'd ask. They never did. But someone else did. It happened the night they decided I wasn't worth being a Romano anymore. The timing was so cruel, it almost felt rehearsed. A few months after I signed the loan from Mrs. Garland and officially took over the business, I got the invitation. Mom's 60th birthday bash. A full-blown banquet at a swanky restaurant in Brooklyn Heights, the kind with a coat check, valet, and too many forks on the table. The kind of place where people like my parents belong. And according to them, where people like me are tolerated. I almost didn't go. I had a wake scheduled for that morning and a service to prep for the next day. But the guilt kicked in. Because guilt always does. I told myself it would just be dinner. A few polite nods, a glass of wine, a cab home. I wore a navy dress I'd bought secondhand and got the heels resoled last minute so they wouldn't squeak on the marble floors. I showed up 5 minutes early, like I always do, and still somehow walked in last. They were all there. Marco and his wife, grinning like a Ralph Lauren ad. Julia with her latest boyfriend, a lobbyist, I think, talking loud enough to let everyone know who he worked for. My parents were at the center, glowing in the way people do when they're surrounded by what they've built. I wasn't part of the glow, not even close. I barely had time to get a drink before the toast started. Mom clinked her glass and stood up, beaming. "I just want to say how proud I am," she said, her voice high and rehearsed. "Of the life I've built, of the family we've raised. Marco, who saves lives every day. Julia, our brilliant legal mind. And Lena?" She paused, not dramatically, hesitantly, like she wasn't sure what to say. She helps people grieve. She's very compassionate. She gave a tight smile and sat down before the silence got too awkward. It was the kind of moment you swallow, a bitter little pill. I smiled. I raised my glass. I told myself it didn't matter, but it did. Later that night, after dessert, my dad pulled me aside outside the restaurant. It was cold, windy. I wrapped my coat tighter. He didn't bother with small talk. "Look," he started. "This isn't easy to say. Your mother and we've been having conversations about the family estate, the business, the trust. I knew where this was going." I felt it coming in my stomach before he even finished the sentence. "We're reallocating things. Marco and Julia, they've proven themselves. Their paths are clear. Yours is still unclear." Unclear. That's the word he used. Like I was a smudge on the family portrait. "So you're cutting me out?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "It's not punishment," he said, his voice soft, rehearsed. "It's encouragement. Maybe this'll push you to think bigger. Reevaluate." I nodded. Not because I agreed, just because I didn't trust my voice not to crack. And then, like the universe had been waiting for the most humiliating possible moment, my phone buzzed. Not once, but 4 times in a row. Same number? I recognized it immediately. My attorney. I turned away from my father, took the call. "Lena?" she said. "It's done. The city just approved the permit transfer. You officially own the building. Congratulations." I froze. Right there on the sidewalk, under the glow of a restaurant awning I could never afford to eat in without a coupon. For a second, I forgot my dad was standing right there, waiting to hear me accept his dismissal. "Thank you," I said, blinking fast. "That's incredible." When I turned back around, he was watching me, curious, probably assuming I was talking to a boyfriend or someone beneath his radar. "Work call?" he asked, half smiling. I smiled back. "Something like that." That night, I didn't go home. I went to the building. My building. It was still half empty, still smelled like old carpet and forgotten paper, but it was mine. Willow and Romano now had a permanent home. No more rent, no more backup plans. Just bricks, walls, a roof, and a future that didn't need approval from anyone. I sat on the floor and cried. Not because I was sad, because I was finally done asking to be seen. They'd cut me off because they thought I had nothing. And now, I had everything I needed. The funny thing is, I didn't plan the reveal. There wasn't some dramatic PowerPoint or family group text with a press release attached. I didn't send out invitations or mail them a copy of my business license. I was too busy, too tired, and honestly too worn out from years of being talked over to even want to explain myself anymore. But fate has a cruel sense of timing. Or maybe poetic. It started with a journalist. Her name was Carla DeWitt, freelance writer for a small section in the New York Times that highlights local businesses doing community work. She came in one morning with her sister, whose husband had just passed unexpectedly. A stroke. 49 years old. No warning. We took care of everything. Quietly, gently, without fuss. A week later, Carla called me and said, "You probably don't remember me, but I remember you. I want to write about your funeral home." I almost said no. I didn't want the attention. I didn't want the calls. I didn't want my mom printing it out and drawing circles around the word funeral with red ink like it was a spelling error in a college essay. But Carla insisted. She said it wasn't about the business. It was about how we treated people. So I said yes. 2 weeks later, the article ran, "Grace in Grief, How Willow and Romano is Redefining What It Means to Say Goodbye." There was a photo. I was standing in the front entryway, arms crossed, smiling in that awkward way people do when they're not used to seeing themselves in newspapers. The morning it published, my phone buzzed so hard it slid off my desk. First, it was Alicia, my assistant, then my florist, then the hospice coordinator from St. Luke's, then, God help me, my mother. "Call me as soon as you see the article." Her text read. No punctuation, which is how I knew she was trying not to seem desperate. I didn't reply. I watched as the article got reshared on Facebook, LinkedIn, even Instagram. A few hours later, Julia texted, "Holy shti, Lena, you own it? Like actually own the building?" I left that one on read. Then Marco. "Wow, I had no idea you'd grown it that much. Congrats" also left on read. That weekend, my dad called. Twice. Left voicemails both times. I didn't even listen to them. On Monday, a letter arrived, handwritten, from my mom. Inside was a clipping of the article, folded neatly, with a post-it that said, "Your grandfather would be proud. Love, Mom." That sentence hit me harder than anything else, because I didn't even know she remembered him like that. He was the only one in the family who ever asked me what I wanted. Not what I planned to do, but who I wanted to be. That same day, we got a call at the front desk from a councilwoman in Queens. She'd read the article and wanted me to come speak at a city roundtable about community-based end-of-life care. I laughed out loud. Like, belly laughed. The same girl who used to sneak out the back door during family reunions was now getting asked to speak for the community. I said yes. And no, I didn't invite my family. Not out of spite. But because I knew they wouldn't come for the right reasons. They'd come to be seen sitting in the front row. They'd shake hands, drop my name like a hot stock tip, maybe even mention a cousin who was also thinking about launching something. But they wouldn't come for me. The panel went well. I spoke about grief, about dignity, about what it means to make someone's last memory of their loved one not painful, but bearable. People cried. I cried. A reporter from WNYC pulled me aside afterward and said, "You're going to be asked to do more of these. Just be ready." I wasn't, but I smiled anyway. That night, back at the funeral home, I sat on the steps outside. The sun had just set, and the old willow tree by the fence cast long shadows across the brick wall. I pulled out my phone. Dozens of texts, missed calls, social media tags. All from people who hadn't called me in years. And for once, I felt no urge to answer, no need to perform. They finally saw me. And it didn't change a damn thing about who I was. I should have seen it coming. After the article, the panel, the WNYC piece, it was only a matter of time before they came knocking. And when they did, they didn't come with apologies. They came with strategy. It started with a text from Julia. "Mom wants to throw a dinner in your honor. The club has a private room. Press will be there." Then Marco emailed, "Spoke to a friend at New York University Medical. They're looking to collaborate on grief services. You should loop Dad in. His firm could fund it. Loop Dad in. As if he hadn't cut me out of the family trust just 8 months ago for being unclear. But the real punch came a week later, when I got a glossy envelope delivered to my office. Inside, an official letter on my father's company letterhead. They wanted to formally invite Willow and Romano to join the Romano Family Holdings portfolio. They'd provide operational support, PR strategy, and brand integration. At the bottom, in neat bold letters, ownership adjustment proposal, 51% Romano Family Holdings, 49% Lena Romano. I read that sentence 3 times. Then I laughed so hard I startled the new intern. They weren't just trying to get in now. They wanted control. Over something they didn't believe in, didn't help build, didn't ask about when I was working 14-hour days and eating canned soup over a casket ledger. I didn't respond. Not right away. I needed to be calm when I did. So I waited until the annual Romano Foundation Gala. I never attend, but this year I bought a ticket. Quietly, under a different name. I sat near the back and watched as they handed out awards and gave speeches about legacy and community. Then, right before dessert, I walked up to the mic. No warning, no fanfare, just me. "Hi," I said, steady and clear. "I'm Lena Romano. You may remember me as the one you cut out." There was a ripple through the crowd. My mom froze mid-sip. Julia's eyes went wide. Marco had the decency to look down. "I wasn't invited here to speak," I continued. "But since my name's now appearing in family press releases and business proposals, I figured I should clarify a few things." I pulled out the letter from Dad's firm. Read the offer, word for word. "See?" I said, holding it up. "This is what it looks like when people try to buy their way into something they didn't believe in until it was profitable. And it's also what it looks like when people confuse family legacy with brand leverage." I turned to the crowd. I built my business from the ground up, without money, without connections, and without anyone in this room asking once, "How are you really doing?" I ended with this. Willow and Romano will remain fully independent. It exists for the families who walk in our door broken, not for the ones who walk into boardrooms polished. And as for my place in the Romano family, you've made that part very clear. I'm done chasing a seat at your table. I built my own. Then I walked out. 2 weeks later, my dad's company was hit with a quiet but devastating story in the Times about misappropriated charitable funds from the foundation. Not by me, by someone inside. Someone who'd been using donor funds to boost community PR by sponsoring their own kids' private school galas and ski trips. I didn't report it. But I didn't shield them either when a reporter called me for a quote. All I said was, "I run a business based on accountability. I expect the same from anyone using my name." My mom tried to call. I let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave one, and just like that, they stopped calling. It didn't hurt like I thought it would. I still see Marco sometimes. He visits the funeral home now and then, quieter than he used to be. Once, as we stood beside a family making arrangements, he looked around and said, "I get it now." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't need to. Here's what I've learned. Being cut off doesn't end you. Sometimes it sets you free. Sometimes you only start living fully once you realize you never needed the people who told you that you weren't enough. If any part of this hit home for you, if your family ever tried to define your worth for you, I hope you'll share your story in the comments. I really do read them. And if you want more stories like this, go ahead and stick around. You never know whose silence is hiding a storm worth hearing. Thanks for listening. Be kind to yourself. You matter more than you think.